Good morning, everybody. My name is Ruth Aguilera from Northeastern University, and as Robin Chan, who is at the SMS office, I'm joined with my co-host Becca Quijo from ILIR School at Cornell. And so good morning, good afternoon, good night, everybody from joining us from everywhere in all over the world actually today. This is an initiative that Becca and I started as part of the membership committee at SMS. It started in Minneapolis in 2019, the last time that we had an SMS, and it was a women's networking breakfast series that then we turned into a women's networking webinar series, and this is targeted to men and women of SMS, both of them, and we have another one coming up. This is the third one today. So let me move on to introduce our two awesome panelists that they don't need much of an introduction. So we'll start with Christine Beckman. Professor Beckman is the Price Family Chair in Social Innovation and a professor at the University of Southern California Price School of Public Policy, in addition to having courtesy appointments at the Marshall School of Business and in the Department of Sociology. You might know her because she is also the current chief editor of ASQ, and she has also been the division chair of OMT at AOM. Today, her research focuses on organizational learning, interorganizational networks, inequality, innovation, and entrepreneurship. The reason why we invited her today is because she has co-written a fabulous book with her co-author Melissa Max-Maniman, titled "Dreams of the Overwork: Living, Working, and Parenting in the Digital Age," published by Stanford University. And this book, as Christine will share with us, is an ethnography account of the pre-COVID challenges of working parents and their aspirations to be ideal workers, perfect parents, and and have the ultimate bodies being ultimate best health. She and her co-author highlight how technology intensifies these myths of perfection, celebrates the people who actually do the work of scaffolding the dreams of those around them, and reveals the hidden sources of gender inequality in everyday life. So welcome, Christine. She's joining us from California, so it's early for her. And next we have Professor Jamie Latch. Jamie is a professor in the Management and Organizational Development Group at the Damore McKim School of Business at Northeastern University. She has also been very involved in the academy, leading the careers management and the careers management division, I believe. Her research focuses on the intersection of work and family, stigmatized social identities, career equality, and gender and diversity issues in organizations. She is joining us with also an outstanding book published by Oxford University Press, co-author with Dana Greenberg, and the book is titled "Maternal Optimism: Forging Positive Paths Through Work and Motherhood." So welcome to both of you. And we're gonna start with the first question. And please, from the audience, feel free, we have 63 participants, so this is very exciting. Feel free to post the questions in the Q&A, and Becca and we will try to integrate in the outline that we have designed for you today. So the first question, maybe we'll start with Christine, and we can take turns one after the other, is, each of you studies challenges that individuals face in balancing the work-life interface. What are the structural advantages and disadvantages of academia that shape the challenges that women face? Thank you.
Terrific. Thanks, Ruth and Becca. It's great to be here, and nice to see so many familiar names in the attendees. I think so. My book talks about the ideal worker, and in very different contexts, but I think a lot of academia sort of fits in the expectations of an ideal worker, right? We're available 24/7. There's a lot of working from home. There's a lot of priority of work. And so the advantage of our work, I would say, is that we have flexibility to sort of work when and where we need to. I mean, there's certainly meetings, there's teaching, like there's blocks that we can't move around, but we do have an enormous amount of flexibility to sort of move things around as need be, and that's unusual for a lot of kinds of work. So that's, I guess I would say, our advantage. The disadvantage for academia is that it's never done. Right? There's always more to be done, more to do, and the tenure clock. That set sort of structure of you have to accomplish a certain amount by a certain point, especially for women who are often sort of the prime childbearing age. To have young kids and be doing that is particularly difficult. So that's more like a law firm or sort of some other professions, right, where there's sort of an up and out demand that's sort of happening at an intense point in time. So yay on the flexibility, but there's some real, and the other thing I'll say is, what's always interesting to me about that flexibility is there's gendered ways that we talk about it. I mean, I know many female academics that talk about their flexibility as a way of juggling work and home, and many male academics whose well, hear their spouses say, well, he's never done, so I have to do even more. So it's interesting that flexibility can be used to allow us to juggle easier, or to say, I don't have time to do anything other than this work that is all consuming.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Jamie.
Yeah, well, thank you also for inviting me today. And obviously these conversations are very much centered around my research and my life, which is how I basically position myself as a scholar, by sort of leaning into that family identity as someone that started academia with a 12-week-old in a PhD program. So I would absolutely concur with Christine about the flexibility. I often say that in our field, it's an illusion of flexibility because everybody, even outside of academia, always thinks, how many people have heard, oh, you have the summers off, that's so great, it's so wonderful. And so outside of our field, people just have this expectation that because we have this flexibility, or this illusion of flexibility, that we are actually flexible. But I agree with Christine, the work is never done. And I think the paths to success, or the path to success in our field, is very one-dimensional in a lot of ways. Like we know that there's one path that is deemed successful across the board in our field. We don't often value other paths, and I think we need to. That's sort of the structural disadvantage, I think, is that we only recognize this one path when there are many different paths to success. And actually, in my book, that was the goal of the book, was to say that there is no one size fits all for women in general, that there are many different paths, and the one I take may look very differently from the ones that you all take, and so forth. And we may borrow bits and pieces from different paths, but they're unique in and of themselves. So I think that there is a disadvantage in our field that we tend to reward this one, path, of a linear path, which is often the rewarded path in ideal worker norm settings and other fields as well. And unfortunately, we lack the flexibility to see beyond, those distinct paths. I'd also say that a structural disadvantage in our field, or at least in academia, is I don't think the policies that we have, the work-family policies we have, are so cut and dry as they might be in other organizations. Ellen Kosak is actually, she's got a new paper that's out in, I think it's Organizational Dynamics, based on a NSF grant that she received. And she talks about the fact that there's so many mixed messages and unclear messages about how to use these policies. And it's probably because of that lack of, or illusion of, flexibility, right? So women often have these questions of, well, you know what, I'll just wait to have a child until, or I'll try to time it, so I do it in the summer, so I'm not teaching during that time. Or they'll set up these kind of unique situations that work for them to fit what is normally a path or a policy that's geared towards someone that doesn't have, the kind of strange teaching research sort of deadlines that we have.
So I've heard you both mention, people kind of taking their own paths, figuring out what's going to work for them. Can each of you speak a little about individual strategies that you've seen that are effective, whether you've seen these used in academia or you've seen them in other settings and you think they might be effective in academia? You know, one dichotomy that I'm familiar with is segmentation versus integration, that spectrum. We could talk about other strategies too. So any insights you have on those?
Do you want me to start this time for this
Sure,
one?
Jamie, you can start this one.
All right, great. Yeah, so, you know, the integration segmentation, that's really a strategy that people leverage, and people choose different strategies depending on what their preferences are. We were talking about this before we started, that people have different preferences, and it may depend on age, it may depend on audience, right? You may change your preference depending on who you're talking to. I tend to be an integrator, but I think it's very much because my identity, my research identity is very much wrapped into my personal identity. It's kind of hard not to be an integrator. I've sort of leaned into that identity, even it leaned in a different way that Sheryl Sandberg might suggest leaning in, but really trying to leverage that and make it, I guess, a positive, we would call it positive distinctiveness, you know, in the OB literature in terms of impression management. I like to have pictures of my kids in my background to remind people that that is who I am, but also a reflection of what I do as well. And I do that with my kids too. I mean, I integrate with them. I mean, they knew I was presenting today. I told them, don't bother me during this 1 hour if you come home, but they, you know, what's the presentation about? You know, they're asking questions, and I like that. That works for me. It doesn't work for everybody, but that works for me. I also think, I mean, in terms of individual, I'm not sure that this is an individual strategy, but I think it's really important to seek out role models, because just because what I do might work sometimes for me, I like to see what other people do and what's worked for other people and what hasn't worked for other people. One role model is never enough. I think having multiple role models, and there isn't, I think there's a fair amount of good role models. Many of them are on the screen for me, and probably in the participant pool today, you know, that we can look to in our field to really see, you know, what works. I'm amazed, even at Northeastern, I mean, we have people, the women in our, in the business school anyway, have pretty tremendous work family stories, you know, 3, 4 kids, sometimes more. And that's pretty impressive for, you know, this, you know, what always feels like an impossible thing of balancing work and family. There's some really successful role models out there.
Yeah, and so as Jamie said, we were talking before, so I tend to be a segmenter. I keep things separate. So I have 2 to-do lists. I have my personal to-do list and I have my work to-do list. I don't like to see my personal to-do list when I'm working because it distracts me from trying to work. I'm also a big compartmentalizer. Like I describe it as, you know, if you might, like if you remember going to the movies long ago, right, and there'd be like these thick velvet curtains that would sort of hang down sort of on the sides of the movie theaters. Like I sort of pull this big thick curtain down, like, and sort of don't think about anything like beyond sort of what I'm working on at that moment. So I'm a huge compartmentalizer and segmenter. Although my kids do know, we know what a decision letter is, what a tenure letter is. So I talk about it with them, but it doesn't go both ways as often. I think that's partly because I'm not a work, you know, it's not central to my research identity. My book project started with Melissa Mazmanian. I'm really interested in technology and the role of technology in work. That was our window in. And we've been studying it in the workplace, and people always talked about how they always had to take work home with them, and we were curious what it looked like at home. And then when we got there, of course, we saw that technology actually wasn't the driving force about what enabled people to manage work and life. What enabled people to do it was the structures of support that they had developed. And so that sort of led us to, you know, to work that Jamie has known about and written about for much longer than I have. But this idea that, right, the strategies that people have are things around, you know, managing carpool, who does laundry, who cooks, how to manage, right? So how to manage all the logistics of daily life. For us, that was the realization that's what enabled people. Those are the strategies that mattered the most, was those strategies around managing those personal responsibilities that took a lot of time and it required people to not be as available to work as they wanted. So for me, Becca, the strategies that I observed were things around the scaffolding structure, right? The hiring out various activities. I know an academic who jokes that laundry is getting it clean and in the basket, like folded and in the drawers, is not even considered something that would be desired, right? So you're sort of having a set of expectations that seem workable to manage, because you could spend a lot of time, and we do spend a lot of time managing the home front. So for me, a lot of the strategies are around laundry, cooking, trying to figure out what is it that's most important to you, and then trying to let other things go.
Can I just add, in our book, we talk about this concept called crappy dinners. And it's similar to that, where you get together with your friends and you just pull together whatever's in the refrigerator, and anything goes. And I have a good friend who's a doctor, and I'm always amazed because it could be 8:30 at night, and I'm thinking, oh my God, where's the dinner? Why isn't she feeding her kids? And she's just laid back. She's like, okay, if they eat at 9 tonight, that's just what happens. And we spend so much time wrapping ourselves around the guilt that we have around what it's like to be an ideal mother and an ideal parent and an ideal worker. And I think what Christine is pointing to, and we point to also, is this idea that we can let some of that go, and that's ideal too.
Do either of you have any thoughts on thinking about that from the other perspective? Like, are there effective ways to think about managing our work? Right, so you're thinking about, you're talking about home strategies to manage the home life and keep some of those tasks under control. Are there ways, and I don't know if you have thoughts on this, but ways to manage our work life, the tasks that we have that will help with that balance as well?
I mean, so for me, a lot of these end up being, so there's certainly, like, I talked about my curtain that I pull down and focus on work, right? So that's certainly that's one of my work strategies. But a lot of it is also things around that are not just individual, but department level, right? So what time is your seminar? When are faculty meetings? I think when I first got to UC Irvine, the seminars were at 4 p.m. So they went from 4 to 5:30, and then there was always a reception from 5:30 to 6:30 to meet with the speaker, right? When we actually had real in-person seminars. And I had 2 little kids, and my husband traveled a ton. He wasn't home, and to get from 6:30, to get home, I was getting, and I basically said, could we move the time of the seminar? And my colleagues were wonderful. That was just the time that had always been had been true. There was no one else in that situation, and sort of being able to say, yeah, sure. There's no reason we can't start the seminar at 2. Another friend whose faculty meetings were always in the evening because everyone taught at different times of day, and needed to get a babysitter just to attend a faculty meeting. And again, right? I mean, when you get enough people in positions where they can say, okay, instead, why don't we set aside a certain time of day where we don't schedule classes? And so we could sort of, within the context of the workday, have a faculty meeting. I think a lot of it is being able to have practices like that are respectful of people's boundaries, and that's not just people with kids. I think that those kinds of things can benefit everybody to allow people to have lives outside of work, and to be able to predict. I can plan. I can go to dinner with a friend. So I think that to me, a lot of those are around more collective norms, because these are things that are really hard for individuals to solve, because those boundaries, right? We need to be working all the time. It's 24/7. We talked about that. So if we're trying to set the boundaries without any support from our departments, I think it makes people reasonably feel quite anxious. That'd be my start.
Yeah, I would just add, I mean, I always say to women that I talk to about, how to negotiate work-life strategies at work, I always say, if you don't ask, then you won't get. So you never know until you ask. I think earlier in my career, I would never have asked for certain things. And now, as I move further in my career, although even if I reflect back on my younger self, I wish I had done this more, is to speak up when I felt like, no, this is not a good time for a meeting for me. I have no problem saying that now. And I think the more you do that, then other people start to do that as well. So I sort of have my list of things I will not do now. I mean, I'm not always successful in getting away with not doing all of them, as Ruth knows, but if I am going to do with it, it's going to come with some things that benefit me as well. So for example, like I have some absolute, like I will not teach at certain times. And I ended up taking over the teaching scheduling so that I could make sure that I was getting the schedule that I wanted, but also to recognize that other people have certain needs as well. I may have taken that too far because of course I had people asking, well, Friday's my grandpa day. That's the day I spend time with my grandkids. And I'm like, oh, great. Why do you have to say that to me? And now I'm like, oh, okay. No teaching on Fridays for you. So you have to do that within reason, but I think, you know, you can set up your own boundaries for what you're willing to do and what you're not willing to do. And maybe you won't achieve all of those. Maybe they won't let you get away with all of it. But I think it's good to set those boundaries, you know, and hopefully others will do the same.
Yeah, those points all make sense. Thank you. So many of us have observed that different groups have been differentially impacted during the pandemic, with particular effects on women with young children, parents with young children. What have you observed? What does this look like? And are there ways that we can think about addressing these differential impacts, whether we're thinking about, you know, the time we have left within the pandemic, or even what it means for the time afterward when we go back to whatever version of normal that we land in?
Well, maybe before you answer, shall we let, there's a question related to this from Vanessa. Vanessa, do you want to ask the question?
So I was reading, it seems like the question is about what to do about having children on your CV, because when you go up for tenure, there's sort of the cohort comparison of like who, right?
From Vanessa, yeah. So Vanessa, I unmuted you if you want to ask the question.
Yeah, sure. So, you know, well, first of all, thanks all for sharing your perspectives. This is super helpful. You know, so I've heard this, and I'd be curious if you agree with this, that, you know, because when you go up for tenure, what people compare is based on your PhD year, and because people take extensions on their tenure clock for many reasons, not only, you know, children being born, perhaps you were doing, you just could take a year to focus on research or other things, that it becomes an issue in the sense that if people don't care for the reason that your tenure clock was stopped, if you've taken leave for parental reasons, that this ends up sort of disadvantaging women as opposed to men, given, you know, the sort of unequal sharing of responsibilities here. So I'd be really curious to hear your perspective on, you know, first of all, whether you agree with this thing that I've heard. And if you do, you know, what are ways to potentially counteract this? You know, does it make sense to sort of be explicit when you're going up for tenure? Like, I had 2 children and they were born on these dates, or is that received a little strangely?
You know, I remember when I was going up for tenure, my associate dean, who was a woman at the time, actually said I actually got divorced in my pre-tenure years. And she encouraged me to share as much of my personal story as possible if I was comfortable with it. You know, you have to be comfortable with what that story is, because people may not know why there is a gap. And so I think that I would like to believe that people are a lot more sympathetic, especially now given COVID. And I think we've seen a lot drawn attention to the issues and how it's affected women and mothers more broadly. But I mean, but maybe that's because I'm an integrator, and Christine may have a different response, but yeah. I'm all in favor of sharing as much as possible so people know and don't make any assumptions. You should own that story and how you want to tell that story, as opposed to letting others just make assumptions for you.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, it's good. We're a good team, Jamie, because I didn't share much of that. Although my kids, I think, were young at similar ages to Jamie's in my career. But I think so. I'm thinking more about sort of my role now, and I'm writing letters. And so I guess I would say 2 things. One is, yeah, I totally agree. Share what part of your story you're comfortable with. I wasn't comfortable sharing a lot, so I kept a lot to myself. I'm not sure that was the right strategy, but that's just sort of where I was at that point in my career. But so on this particular issue around tenure letters, so I know that institutions will often, not always, but they will put in there as part of their policy, if they have a policy to have an extension that says, you know, please use not the time since degree, but what a tenurable record is, regardless of the length of time that it's taken to get here, because we've decided, and I don't remember the language, but I do know that there are institutions that have that, and I think that's a really useful thing for this very reason, to say, don't compare, this person to someone else that got their PhD in, 2012 or 2014, compare it to, is this a tenurable record? So the extent that institutions do that, and that is something you should know from your institution, like how do they frame that request? That is one way that institutions are trying to mitigate that problem. The other thing I would say is, when I write tenure letters, I look at what the cohort is, just to sort of give myself a range of like, who are the people that are going up around this time. But it's not, if I was writing a letter in 2014, right, for someone that had gone up in 2014, I'm comparing it time of tenure, right? I'm not comparing like what you have done, expecting you to have done 2 more years than someone else. It really is supposed to be like, is this tenurable? And so whenever you go up, I try, and when I write my letters, to think about it as a tenurable, not as a you've had 6 years versus 4 years versus 8 years. But so that, I guess that's my answer to that. Ruth, you may have thoughts about this too. And you probably also write lots of tenure letters.
Becca, you want to continue? Thank you. Yeah, I think you cover both ends of the spectrums. And as I wrote in the chat, not only about children, but other life events, a sick partner, you being sick, taking care of your parents. And, it can be written in different levels of intimacy or privacy, right? It can be written differently as well.
Yeah, and as Russ sort of says here too, I think we know that this, I think people know this is something we need to be careful about, right? And the same is going to be true for the pandemic. I've heard lots of conversations about what do we do for faculty now? So USC gave everyone an extra year. Well, that's great, but not everyone has been equally impacted. And so I've heard conversations about people saying what we really need to do is not give people an extra year, but just to acknowledge that people are going to have done less when they go up for tenure in this moment than others, and for that to be okay. So I think it's going to be institutionally different, but there have been lots of discussion at my institution. We've got a form, like, this is how the pandemic has influenced me, right? I have 2 young kids, and my childcare disappeared, and I've been sort of doing this on my own for 12 months. Like that should matter, and that is something that we are in our personnel process, like putting in explicitly to try and make sure. And it would go actually out to the letter writers. There's controversy about that. Like, do you want to force people to disclose? You can't really, so I haven't found a perfect solution to it, but letting people disclose when they can, providing a form that it's coming from the institution, I think is actually easier probably than sort of having it on your CV necessarily. I think the thought for us at USC was that by having this, everyone fills it out, and you could decide you don't want to disclose anything, but if it's with everybody's packet, that would make it less easier to disclose and easier for letter writers to account for that.
So I want to, before I get to the question I was about to ask, I do want to bring attention to a question that Russ Koff brought up that relates to the way that colleagues might support women by providing flexibility and just general support. Both of you mentioned, asking for flexibility with scheduling, flexibility with, maybe moving a department meeting. So Russ asked, as you noted, colleagues can help by seeking to understand and provide support and flexibility. Are there examples of well-intentioned colleagues or policies that could make things worse?
Yeah, well, so on the teaching schedule one, I definitely have one of those, right? We had an operations person in charge of our scheduling, and she was really trying to optimize efficiency. And so she moved my class a half hour earlier one quarter without giving me any advance warning, and there was no way for me to get my kids to school and then get to class on time. And I was a junior faculty member, and I ended up having the class start at 9 rather than 8:30 and just making it up with we did an online simulation one Friday and sort of said, you know, this is, so I made a, you know, so the class hours were the same. So that, I mean, that would be one example to Russ's question. You know, she was well-intentioned from a school level perspective, and sort of just didn't account for the fact that like that half hour was really important to my day.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any specific examples, but I can see how things like that could happen. I mean, I try to, when I'm doing the scheduling right now, I try not to make any assumptions. I try to sit down and talk to people and figure out and try to combat any of those issues ahead of time. But I think that, you know, that doesn't always work, right? I might make certain assumptions about certain people. Like, for example, we have a new hire that we just, someone that we brought in. For her, you know, she doesn't know what her childcare situation is going to be. So she wants to teach on a schedule that I would never have expected anybody to want to do, like 4 days a week or something like that. But I would have made that assumption. I was trying to cram her into 2 days, get her in early and out early, and that wasn't going to work for her. So I think, you know, it's about, to avoid those kinds of situations, we can ask and not try to make certain assumptions based on what we think is going to work for certain people.
That sounds consistent with a theme I'm hearing in several of the answers that you guys have shared, is that a lot of the challenges seem to be somewhat idiosyncratic. So there's themes across the challenges that women face, but everybody has their own unique situation. So one thing that might make things worse is making an assumption that this solution is going to fix a problem for a particular person without just asking. So maybe it really is getting down to what are your individual needs? What are the individual challenges you're facing versus making assumptions and kind of coming up with solutions on that basis. So I think we actually kind of touched on how we can think about the differential impacts of the pandemic, but I'm curious if either of you have thoughts on differential impact of having kids, of raising children, the challenges of maybe being the primary care provider. Someone in one of the questions also brought up, you know, do you have strategies or thoughts when I have a spouse who has an equally demanding job? So maybe it's not so easy to, you know, share the workload easily, you know, the home workload as easily. Any thoughts on that? So either from the individual or the institutional perspective.
I have a lot of thoughts on this because we just collected so much data, too much data. We're drowning in the data, and the stories and anecdote. We have qualitative data and quantitative data, but the qualitative data and the anecdotes around the sharing of, you know, caregiving for among, you know, for dual earning couples is really interesting. In fact, one of the women that did some of the interviews for me, she was an undergrad. She was really, I would meet with them weekly. There were 3 people that were doing the interviews, and I'd say, well, share with me some surprising things that you're hearing. And, you know, you'd hear one of them would say, wow, well, some of these people, and we interviewed men and women, were really happy with who they chose as a spouse. The pandemic was bringing attention to that. Whereas the others were calling out, like, one woman actually said, I can't believe I'm saying this being recorded, but I'm not attracted to my husband anymore because he doesn't do anything. And now I'm seeing how much he really, you know, doesn't do anything. So, I mean, I think what we're seeing with the effects of the pandemic is just you know, I mean, not that the inequalities didn't exist before, but they're just being highlighted and emphasized to the nth degree. And I mean, I'm likely to look at that as a silver lining, because the more you can emphasize that, hopefully the more we can address it and potentially make it go away. But one of the things that, you know, I'm writing about right now in my research is the shock effects that happened during the pandemic, and we call them infrastructure shocks, right? Because what the pandemic really did for working parents is basically eliminate any infrastructure, the physical space to go somewhere, to get out of the house, for those that weren't essential workers, particularly, you know, for us in academia, where your home and your work is one and the same. And that might be not so out of the norm for many of us, but when you're doing it every day, it can be difficult, especially when your kids are here and now you've taken over the job of trying to be a teacher and, you know, doing things that you're not used to doing on a regular basis. And then obviously the loss of childcare infrastructure. And also there's a family sort of dynamic that, and an infrastructure loss there too, where everybody is kind of all in the same place. So I think what it's done is, I hope, from a practical standpoint, is making organizations, I don't know about universities right now, but we're talking a lot about this idea, and now policy is trying to influence us a little bit about thinking about childcare as an infrastructure issue, thinking about childcare as a business issue, not just a family issue. And that's just really important to think about. We never thought about it that way. I had a huge argument with my father-in-law this weekend about, the Biden's bill and what is infrastructure, and, and I don't want to get political, but I mean, I just was trying to get down to brass tacks and just say people need to get to work, and childcare, dropping your kids off at school or in a daycare center is one way to get to work, just like our roads and bridges. And so we have to think and change our mindset in that regard.
Yeah, I agree about that infrastructure point. Huge. And I think that is what the pandemic revealed to people that hadn't seen it before. Because our book came out in June, right as 3 months into the pandemic. And so all of the things that we were talking about that people had built, the scaffolding, right, the babysitters, the extra carpools, the various ways people, it just disappeared, right? I mean, people that were relying on grandparents didn't have their grandparents anymore because they were worried about getting sick. The daycare's closed, the school's closed. And so just that everything that people had built disappeared in an instant, and then people were just, relying on the people at home. And so I think that shock was so dramatic and so difficult. I mean, I think that the idea that people could actually work and manage their kids at home 24/7, I think it made it really clear that that's just not possible. Like that's not about working harder or smarter. That is just not possible to do. And that the schools and the daycares, like that is what we rely on to be able to work. And so we need to treat it with that level of importance. And I was talking with a junior faculty member the other day who said, I'm vaccinated, which is great, but my kids are still not in school and my life is still horrible, right? I mean, so really the vaccine did nothing for this person. It was really like, I need to get my kids back in school because that's the only thing that's going to open up time. So I think the pandemic made that really clear. And I too hope that sort of changes the conversation because more people that didn't see it are now aware of that. On the sort of question around, you sort of alluded to, Becca, one of the questions here around the spouse and flexibility and sharing of work. And right, so our book, we talked to single parents who are juggling all of this right by themselves, right? So I think it's important to point out like how, that is, even before the pandemic, in our book, those were the families that our hearts went out, like the guilt that they experienced around the things that they just literally couldn't do. I mean, it wasn't, if the schools, play is at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday, most working people can't just show up for that. And so the shaming that was happening among parents, the difficulty of juggling. So I just think so single parents sort of, I feel like we deserve a whole topic all by themselves. Sounds like Jamie, you at least for a point were in that space. And so I guess I just wanted to sort of say that. But on the partner side, so we talk in our book about invisible work. It's sort of something you read in the, we're not the first to talk about this. This is something people have talked about for a long time, but there's the physical work of, cooking and laundry. There's the mental work of making the list, like what's going to have for dinner? What needs to go on the shopping list? Who needs a doctor's appointment? And then there's the emotional work of trying to appreciate and show gratitude for the people that are actually helping. And then there's the coordinating work of okay, so how am I going to get to what's the order of sort of grocery store errands? Who's going to do this pickup? So those are the four kinds of work, right? The physical work, the coordinating work, the mental work, and the emotional work. And I think actually just even having that language can be really helpful for couples to say, I know in my household, as I said, my kids my kids are older now. They're both in college. They came home for the beginning of the pandemic, and we had conversations around, certainly the physical work. We all cleaned the house together. Like I'm not and so that was something that we could do. But like, you're in charge of dinner once a week. Like you figure out what we're having. You make sure you put the stuff on the grocery list. And but using that language helped all of us be more deliberate and articulate about, it's not just about doing the cooking, right? It's also about all of that that mental work and all of that other logistics that need to happen. So I'm a big advocate for using that kind of language in couples, and then to the specific thing around more demanding or less demanding. I think my partner was an academic, so he understood that reading a paper was not a leisure activity. It was actually part of my work. So I think I would just push back on that. That's not a, I might say my husband's on the phone all the time. Like, how unimportant is that? You don't get like, I'm actually doing the real work. I'm actually one sort of writing and making things. You're just talking, right? So, I mean, I think we can frame it any number of ways to make it sound more or less important. And I think we just need to respect each other's work on that one.
I just wanted to add one thing. I have an HBR article that's coming out soon, and it's based on this COVID data on working parents. And one of the questions that we asked was what factors affected who did most of the childcare, or who took on most of the childcare responsibilities. And this is terrible, but more people selected who is better at caring for kids than who makes more money and who's at risk for being laid off. So those gender norms, I mean, who's better at taking care of the kids was, just speaks to, it's really hard to break down, these expectations that we have of why things end up falling more predominantly on, I assume who's better is gendered and leaning more toward the mom than the dad, although I believe that dads are just as capable of doing that.
Yeah, and we definitely, I'm sure you've seen this in your data. We had dads who were more capable than than the moms at child rearing. So certainly it's certainly quite possible. Yeah.
I mean, those norms are very outdated, but they seem to persist.
Yeah. Well, Allison Daminger, I think is her last name. She's a sociology PhD student. She has a American Sociological Review paper around sort of this, really taking this mental work and really breaking it down into different pieces. And what she finds is that couples use gendered language to describe, to explain the decisions that they make, but they do it in such consistent ways. And not like that it was clear it's not actually, that's a convenient reason to sort of say that this is the way why we do it this way. It wasn't actually true that she was better at this and he was better at that, but that we use that language when it's helpful to sort of explain. So she does, I'm not doing justice to her ideas, but she does a nice job of sort of saying, well, it's not that women are better at that. It's just that we sort of tend to we use that language over and over. I saw another question go by in the chat that I thought was important around sort of this disclosure thing, and since I'm the non-disclosure person, I thought I would address it. I mean, so Erin Reed's got a paper around passing and revealing, and she sort of finds that it is more typical for that passing is like, I'm not going to disclose. Revealing is sort of what Jamie was talking about, like I'm going to explain why it is I can't make this meeting at 10 a.m. on a Saturday. And there are real concerns, I think, for women for disclosing and being judged for that. And there's, I think, research suggesting that that's not an unreasonable thing to worry about. I think the question is, how do we fight back, right? So then there's not a number of ways to fight back on that. But the passing is the I can't, right? Or offering a different reason, or like you don't have to disclose why you're not doing something with the real answer, right? I mean, you don't always have to give an answer. So when I was asked in those instances to do things, I would say, oh, I can't make that, I'm sorry. And I wouldn't say it's because I know my husband's out of town and I have to get home, and that probably did a disservice to the junior faculty women underneath me if I sort of think back about normalizing that. But given where I was at that moment in time, that's what I felt comfortable with and what felt safe, and it worked, right? I mean, you don't have to tell people and give people reasons for everything.
But maybe then you can suggest, I cannot make it then, but if you move it half an hour, that would work for me. Just kind of not shut down completely, but just try to be cooperative. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that's I think that's very important for that question that was put in the chat regarding, how much do you disclose? And especially now in the times of COVID, should I disclose that I have my 3 kids at home, that my, housekeeper has quit, that my car is broken and I cannot afford to take it right now, I don't have time. I mean, do I have to disclose all that? Probably not, right? So you can just say, now it's not working.
Although really you can't help it. I think that's one of the interesting things about COVID. And then this was true when we went back, and I'm be curious what your data says, Jamie. When we went back to talk to our people early in the COVID, they said, I can't hide anything, right? We had people, they were doing Zoom around the dining room table. They had no private workspace. They had a 3-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 12-year-old. It was pretty clear, right, that life was chaotic. There was no place to go. And people talked about how in some ways that was really nice because it gave you a window into people's real lives and sort of this authenticity and this way of connecting, right? You see people's backgrounds, you see people's cats. So in some sense, I think Zoom has really given people a window into other people's lives that we didn't have before, and that's humanizing, and that's actually very good for in many instances, although not everyone is equally comfortable with that. And I think there's all sorts of challenges of that as well. But I think it does actually make it easier to be authentic, but at some point it just starts to get too much, right? I mean, my colleague Melissa's 5-year-old son, I think, has been in every Zoom call we've had for like 9 months, and it was cute for a while, right? And it's not her, like it's stressful. It's it's hard. So I actually think that Zoom has changed things in really interesting ways, and I don't know what that will mean going forward. I don't know if you have thoughts about that, Jamie, but I think that's
well, I agree with the authenticity piece, but I think just back to my earlier point about the illusion of flexibility, there's this illusion with with Zoom, which, although yes, it's great that we've become more authentic, but it also provides this platform for us to be available more often. And so, in some ways it could be reinforcing these ideal worker norms that, you write about in your book and Erin Reed talks about in her paper and others have talked about, that can be challenging, and it provides a platform to be meeting all the time and makes it easier to set up a meeting, but also impinging on that life. So I think that there's a trade-off, and we have to figure out how to balance that trade-off. But I agree. I mean, we did a focus group with some employers last year, and they actually talked about this whole idea of, I mean, it's a little bit of peering in the window of people's homes and seeing, learning and understanding more about them, but in a way that brought employees closer together. So while there was infrastructure loss around, the physical, not going to the office, not having the office water cooler talk, not having interactions with your colleagues. I even know, even in my department, Ruth, maybe John will say otherwise since Ruth's husband is in my group, but, I actually feel like I got to know my colleagues a little bit better because we were meeting very regularly on Zoom right when the pandemic hit, trying to just talk to each other about how to navigate this whole quick movement from physical in class to, automatic remote, and what some of the challenges we were facing. And it was just a nice platform to be able to do that. Then it got old really quick, but it was nice for a time being. So I think that there's got to be a balance now that we're entering this, well, hopefully entering this post-COVID world.
Thank you. So you want to move to the next question, or? Well, one of the question, so thanks a lot. I think this is really puts us in this balance between the integrator and the segmenter, like how much information do you share, who receives the information, because there are different cultures in different departments, and obviously like a working life is different than an academic life. So it's at the end of the day is how comfortable every one of us feels. We also know from, many colleagues, men and women, that have said, this is great. This pandemic has been great for my productivity. I never had to get out of my pajamas. I just put a blazer, be in Zoom, back to work, didn't have to commute. I publish more than ever. So it definitely has affected people differently. So, one of the questions, I wanted to switch gears a little bit, because one of the questions that we receive, questions that we received in advance was regarding the work-life balance around the tenure clock, as well as, I would say, as well as the PhD, right? Like the PhD, when you have like this deadline that you have to finish your dissertation, you need to publish, you need to get a job. So it would be nice to, if you could share with us some of the, some pieces of advice on, for this kind of, we have like 6 minutes to go, like maybe some final thoughts on this struggling life balance. And one of the takeaways that we have heard from you today is that there is really not a recipe like of, this do X, Z, and Y, and you'll be set. But if there's anything else that we have forgotten, or that we have not, that it hasn't come up, that you think it's really important, especially for men and women who are balancing work life, and that they have these kind of very tacit deadlines, of getting a job or being promoted to, especially like the tenure promotion.
I mean, I'm going to emphasize two things that I probably already said. One aligns with what you just said, Ruth. I mean, if someone out there is telling you that there is a recipe for success, then you don't believe it, because as I said before, what works for one person is not going to necessarily be transferable to you. It might be a combination of what works for many people. It might be seeing what doesn't work for other people to see what works for you, but it's got to be something very individualized, because everybody has their own, for lack of a better term, shit, in their lives, and has their own experiences. And, if you're just finishing, if you're in a PhD program, every program has different, philosophies about how to get to the finish line. Every university has different strategies and thoughts around this. So it has to be very dependent on, the context that you're in. I will say, and again, this is where I reiterate something I said before, even though those role models still are out there, we have some kick-ass women in our field that have done a whole host of different things and been successful by charting different paths, right, to getting to, whatever the end goal was that they wanted to get to. And I think it's important just to listen to what those stories are. Again, you pick your own story that works for you, but I think it's important to just know that not everybody that's been successful in our field has had this one path to success, this one linear, move up the rung path. There are different approaches that work for different people, and it's very context dependent. I mean, I'd also say, find an organization, find a university. I know it's not that easy in this job market, that is a caring organization, right? A caring university. I have a .2 appointment at the University of Exeter, and I just want to make a plug for how they handled the pandemic. I mean, the only communication there was a lot of communication, but not so much that I felt overwhelmed. Most of the communication was, shut off your email in the evening. The dean would say, I'm not going to email you on the weekends. You're not going to have any, but he was doing it in a caring way. And he was saying, I'll be available for office hours. If anybody wants to talk, I'm just going to have these open coffee chats. And it just felt really genuine. I mean, I didn't necessarily utilize it, but it's nice to know that those things exist. So I think it's really important to find institutions that are caring and supportive. Not the ones that just say they are, but the ones that actually are.
Thank you. So, one of the points that Jamie made, which I think is very important, is define success for yourself. And one of the first webinars, which is posted in the SMS website, is how there is a range of, as a scholar, of definitions of what is success for you. So last word from Christine. Thank you. Regarding this question about the tips.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Jamie about finding a good place. And when I look at women, when I was starting finding people to talk to share with, sort of the community aspect, which I think also came up in one of your earlier webinars, I think is super important. People to commiserate with, people to help, you know, in our book, the people that really were thriving were the ones that also had personal networks, right? They had, and some of those were paid help, some of those were unpaid help. We call it sort of the modular scaffolding, but sort of this idea of you've just got a lot of different places out there to, right? So it may be a parent, it may be a neighbor, it may be a friend, it may be a babysitter, it may be a childcare facility, it may be a housekeeper, it may be DoorDash, it may be Instacart. But like, what are the things that you rely on to navigate and that it's not just about emotional support, it's logistics. It's sort of helping to manage the logistics. And I mean, our book is a lot about not sort of the identity and but much more just about the the tactics of like managing all that stuff. So I think finding support on the work side and on the home side for the things that you need help with. It's, you know, I've not been great at this, but finding ways of using RAs and, you know, the same kind of idea of outsourcing various things at the home front. I'm really good at that. I'm not as good at doing that in academia, but I know lots of people that are. So I've seen it. I've seen people do that. So figuring out like, what's your competitive advantage? Like, what is it you need to do? And then how do you sort of let other people get to help you with the things that aren't as essential that you yourself do, right? And whether that's, you know, cooking dinner, whether that's, you know, doing I'm not going to be able to think of a good example on the work front, but I guess that's what I would say is find people to help.
By the way, I'll just add that, and Ruth knows, like there's a group of women scholars that are getting together to talk through all these structural issues for female scholars. I think we're going to write a piece about it as well. And Ellen Kosek has a bunch of resources as well. Women of OB, they're talking about a lot of these issues. So find your support network. It sounds like you have one here in SMS with this crew.
I think this is a really great note to end on, and it's interesting that it comes back to sort of the goal that Ruth and I had in the very original session, which was a women's networking breakfast where we broke out and talked about professional development topics, but also just really tried to start to build a community of support. And you kind of ended on that note that at the end of the day that it really comes down to that. But beyond that, I think you guys have provided some really good strategies, also made some realistic observations about what we can reasonably expect, having chosen this career, having been in this community. So we'll close it on that. I want to point out that Robin, to everyone watching, Robin noted in the chat that she provided a link to all of our prior webinar sessions as well that you can find on the SMS website. You'll be able to find this one as well. Thank you to Christine and Jamie. This was a really great session and we appreciate your time.
Before I introduce our panelists today, I like to say that we have joining to us today, we have Africa Riño, who is our SMS president, and Anthea Jean, who is the chair of the membership committee and the president-elect. We also have, and it's very exciting, we have our new executive director. She started less than 10 days ago. And as you all know, her name is Barbara, and we will all know how to we'll all need to learn how to pronounce her last name, but I think it's Barbara Grobicki. Barbara?
Grobicki.
Grobicki. So welcome, Barbara. She's joining us from Chicago. She's coming from the American Marketing Association, and it's really a pleasure to have you here and to join us in this webinar. So welcome, Barbara, to SMS.
Thank you.
So as Becca said, this is going to be recorded, and the webinar will last 60 minutes. Just a couple of things. You will see in the bottom that we have two icons. One is the Q&A where you can pose your questions. And the second one is the chat where you can chat with each other and share also ideas, references, etc.